There are moments in history when a single laugh echoes louder than the roar of entire empires. The galaxy laughed at us. They laughed at our festivals, our strange customs, our way of gathering to sing and dance even when the skies burned. They laughed because to them it looked useless, primitive, but the galaxy forgot one truth that every human knows in their bones. The things you mock are often the things you don't understand, and the things you don't understand might be the very things that save you. The Council of 17 Worlds assembled under the vaulted dome of the Celestara Concordance. The chamber glittered with crystal and starfire, its ceiling a vast projection of the galactic arms unfurling in slow spirals. Delegates filled the tiers, scaled, furred, feathered, armored, and all of them had one thing in common: they weren't human. Humanity had been invited only reluctantly after centuries of proving ourselves impossible to eradicate. For most of the assembled species, humans were curiosities, half-wild creatures who built too fast, fought too stubbornly, and celebrated too loudly. Celebrated, in fact, was the word they used as insult. The Jelthari clicked their mandibles in amusement whenever they mentioned Earth's festivals. The Ur swirled their frilled gills in derision when showing holofeeds of humans singing in bunkers during orbital bombardments. The towering Morthak warlords barked guttural laughs at images of our soldiers strumming guitars in mud-slick trenches. Why? Because to them, joy under fire was weakness. To sing when your cities burned, to dance when your species teetered on extinction, to smile when surrounded by enemies, such things were not marks of strength but of lunacy. And so they laughed. But the galaxy would soon learn that humans were not merely laughing in defiance of despair. We were practicing, we were training, we were sharpening the one weapon no fleet could counter and no empire could endure. It began with a single world on the galactic rim, a fringe colony, unnamed in most star charts, its skies torn apart by the Veil Dominion. The Veil were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They did not enslave, nor plunder, nor demand tribute. They erased. Entire cultures blinked out under their tide of black ships, whole histories consumed by silence. The Veil believed in one truth only, that diversity was chaos, and chaos must be ended. The colony should have been easy prey. Its defense grid was outdated, its militia untrained. The Veil landed in iron waves, and yet the humans did not cower. They gathered in the square, 1,000 colonists, shoulder to shoulder, their faces streaked not with war paint, but with ash from the fires. They had no weapons. What they had were drums. When the Veil advanced, the humans beat their drums, not in panic but in rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. The sound rolled across the settlement like thunder. Children clapped their hands. Old women stomped their feet. Voices rose, first in chants, then in song. The Veil hesitated. Their doctrine had no room for this. Enemies were supposed to scream, to beg, to fight, to break, not to sing. The song swelled. The drums quickened. The colonists began to dance, not graceful, not orderly, but wild, fierce bodies moving like sparks in a storm. It was not a performance for survival, it was a declaration. You cannot erase us if we refuse to stop living. The Veil slaughtered them anyway, but here is where the galaxy miscalculated. That song, broadcast on emergency frequencies, raced through human space. From mining asteroids to orbital stations, from oceanic cities to tundra forts, every human settlement replayed it. They replayed it not as a funeral dirge, but as a rallying cry. Humanity's anthem of defiance was born, and with it, a movement. The galaxy laughed harder. Humans think they can fight fleets with songs, the delegates jeered, but the song spread beyond us. Among the insectoid Jelthari, worker drones hummed the rhythm during labor shifts. Among the aquatic Ur, younglings echoed the melody in bubbling clicks beneath the waves. Even among the Morthak, a race bred for war, soldiers found themselves marching to its beat. Something had cracked. The Veil returned, confident as ever, to snuff out another colony. This time, they found the skies alight with human warships, but more than that, they found something worse. They found fearlessness. Soldiers fought not with desperation, but with fire in their eyes, their lips curved in grim smiles, their voices raised in ragged choruses over comms. It unsettled the Veil. Their algorithms could not account for an enemy whose morale rose with casualties, whose courage deepened with loss. By the third battle, whispers spread in alien markets and corridors of power. The humans do not break. In the Grand Concordance, debate raged. Ambassador Trellith of the Jelthari scoffed. It is madness. They think a song can shield them from plasma cannons. Envoy Shur of the Ur swirled his tendrils. It is dangerous. Emotions spread like contagion. If their madness infects others. General Varosk of the Morthak slammed a clawed fist on the table. If it makes them harder to kill, it is not madness. It is a weapon. And in the center of the chamber stood one human representative, Elena Marek, veteran of Earth's last planetary war, survivor of the siege of Artemis Station. She was not tall, she was not armored, she wore no jewels, no ceremonial robes, just a plain black coat, worn boots, and a small pendant of twisted metal, a relic from a destroyed city. When the assembly demanded explanation, she spoke plainly. "You laugh at us for singing," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber. "But that is why we survive. You fight wars with weapons. We fight wars with memory, with hope, with the refusal to let despair write our story." Her words unsettled the delegates more than she realized, because in their hearts some part of them longed for what she described. The Veil did not stop. Their fleets swelled. Their crusade continued. But something was changing. Where once their enemies fell silent, now they found resistance, infused with human defiance. Allies who once dismissed us began to imitate us. Jelthari drones marched to war, humming human tunes. Ur ships carried banners painted with human slogans. Morthak soldiers bellowed human chants before battle. The galaxy had laughed. But now the galaxy was listening, and listening, as they would soon learn, was the first step to believing weapons. What they had were drums. And when the Veil descended expecting submission, they were met with rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. The sound thundered across the settlement, shaking windows and rattling the metal bones of the streets. To the Veil, it was incomprehensible. To the humans, it was life itself. That colony burned, yes, but the rhythm carried beyond the fire, bleeding into every human system, every broadcast, every whisper on the interstellar winds. By the time the ashes cooled, the song had already become something larger than the colony itself. It became an infection, a glorious, defiant infection. The war escalated. The Veil advanced like a black tide, erasing planets, sterilizing cultures, silencing songs. They had perfected annihilation, cold, absolute, without ceremony. Their fleets were endless, their doctrine unyielding. But with every world they struck, humanity's defiance grew louder. On Astera Prime, the last holdouts of a shattered garrison broadcast their final battle as a concert, screaming guitars and pounding percussion echoing through orbital channels even as plasma tore apart their defenses. Millions of listeners across the stars heard their voices carried on static, harmonized by explosions. On the orbital shipyards of Dulthus, engineers welded weapons to the beat of the anthem, timing their strikes so the very bones of their vessels rang with human defiance. On the frost world of Kriva 9, where children huddled in underground bunkers, they sang the song as lullaby. Their mothers' voices were thin with hunger, but they sang anyway, wrapping their little ones in something no bombardment could erase. The Veil called it contamination. The rest of the galaxy began to call it something else. Hope. In the Grand Concordance, cracks spread among the 17 worlds. For centuries, The Council had tolerated the Veil's crusade so long as it did not touch their cause. Fear disguised itself as diplomacy. Cowardice cloaked itself as neutrality. But neutrality was eroding, eaten away by the rhythm of human defiance. Reports arrived from Jelthari hives, drones humming off shift, abandoning perfect silence for imperfect song. Reports from the Ur oceans, younglings refusing to complete memorization drills, instead echoing human chants in the surf. Reports from the Morthak legions, soldiers carving human words into their armor before battle. The infection spread. Not a virus, not a weapon, but an idea. The ambassadors argued, clawed, shouted, contain it, quarantine them, burn Earth before the fire spreads, but others whispered, perhaps this is the fire we need. And then came the Battle of Ravelin Gate. The gate was a strategic choke point, a wormhole nexus linking half the outer rim to the galactic core. The Veil descended on it with overwhelming force, determined to silence the rebellion before it inspired more. Humanity should not have been able to hold. Our fleets were fewer, our guns weaker. Every calculation predicted collapse. But humans don't fight by calculation. When the Veil broke through the first defense line, human ships opened all comm channels, not to broadcast orders, but music. The anthem roared across the void, tens of thousands of voices layered into a storm of defiance. Battleships shuddered under enemy fire, but their crews sang louder. Fighters died in blazing arcs, their last transmissions carrying fragments of melody. And something unthinkable happened. Jelthari mercenaries, contracted to guard the flanks, began drumming their armored legs to the rhythm. Ur vessels, neutral and observing, surged forward to reinforce human lines, chanting through their waterlogged comms. Morthak cruisers, hired as escorts but forbidden to intervene, broke orders and plunged into the heart of the battle, their war cries harmonizing with human voices. The galaxy that once laughed now fought beside us. The Veil were forced back for the first time in their existence, not destroyed, not defeated, but denied. And for the Veil, whose doctrine was built on inevitability, denial was poison. Eleanor Marek stood once more before the Concordance. This time, she was not alone. Behind her stood a Jelthari drone with painted mandibles, a Ur child whose gills fluttered with song, and a Morthak warrior who bore human words across his chestplate. She did not argue. She did not beg. She simply raised her voice in the anthem. And one by one, the delegates joined. Reluctant, trembling alien voices blending into something jagged but undeniable. The galaxy had laughed. The galaxy had listened. Now, the galaxy was singing, but the Veil had not retreated into silence. They were changing. For the first time, they saw resistance that could not be calculated away. And the Veil, cold and absolute, were adapting. On the horizon of the war, something darker stirred. The Veil had always been inevitability incarnate. They did not adapt because they never needed to. They swept across the stars like nightfall, and no dawn had ever risen against them. Until now, when their fleets limped back from Ravelin Gate, scarred and diminished, the galaxy held its breath. For the first time in living memory, the Dominion had tasted something other than silence. They had tasted resistance, and resistance was infectious. On the fractured colonies, humanity rebuilt not with bricks or steel, but with song. In refugee stations, whole decks thrummed with music as survivors traded instruments for food and food for verses. In hospitals, doctors stitched wounds while choirs of patients sang to keep each other awake through the pain. The anthem spread like wildfire through the Concordance. It seeped into Jelthari hive rituals, where clicking drones now layered harmonies into their daily communions. It echoed in Ur waters, their chants bubbling into the currents until entire oceans pulsed with rhythm. Morthak warbands, once brutal and cold, began to march into battle accompanied not just by war horns, but human-style chants, guttural and fierce. It was no longer just humanity's song. It was the galaxies. But on the dark edge of the rim, the Veil were not idle. They had studied the song, dissected its frequencies, its patterns, its psychological hooks. To them, this was not spirit, not hope. It was a contagion, a distortion in the perfect silence they demanded of the universe. And so they forged a weapon. They called it the Null Choir. It was not a fleet in the traditional sense. It was a swarm of resonance engines, vast constructs that devoured sound and meaning, turning vibrations into nothingness. Where they passed, no echoes remained, no voices carried. They erased not only speech, but memory of sound itself, leaving whole populations stumbling in disorientation. The Null Choir was sent to concordant worlds that had embraced humanity's anthem. Within weeks, 5 systems fell silent. Their people still lived, but they were hollow, their defiance stripped away. When word reached Earth, fear rippled through the networks. For the first time, people wondered, what if they can take the song from us? Elena Marek, now both ambassador and symbol, refused to let despair grow. She stood in the old ruins of the Sydney Opera House, rebuilt in glass and steel, and spoke to the galaxy. "They can erase sound," she said, her voice raw, "but they cannot erase meaning. They can silence our throats, but they cannot silence why we sing. And if we cannot sing aloud, then we will sing in silence. If they burn the rhythm from our bodies, then our very heartbeat will be the drum." The broadcast spread across every concordant channel, every human settlement, every alien hive and ocean. For the first time, humanity was not mocked, not pitied. Humanity was followed. The next great stand came at Vela's Moor, a rift system where the Null Choir surged to test its annihilation. The Concordants assembled a fleet unlike any seen before. Human destroyers patched with Morthak armor, submersible cruisers adapted for space, Jelthari hive ships thrumming with new resonance. The anthem pulsed through every channel. The Veil unleashed the Null Choir. Sound itself broke. Voices fell silent mid-cry, instruments stilled, drums muted. A crushing absolute quiet smothered the battlefield. Ships faltered, pilots wept as they felt the song stripped from them. But the humans did not stop. In the silence, they beat fists against metal, boots against decks, bodies against bulkheads. Rhythm lived in motion as much as sound. The Jelthari drones imitated the pounding with their legs, the with the slapping of their tails, the Morthak with the clash of weapons on armor. And then one human mother, her name lost to the chaos, stepped to an open comm and whispered the anthem, voiceless but defiant. Others joined, soundless lips moving, breath shaping words the choir could not kill. Across the fleet, thousands mouthed the song in silence. The rhythm was broken, mangled, imperfect, but alive. The Null Choir faltered. For the first time it could not consume, because silence itself had been turned against it. The Veil reeled, confused, but not broken. Their doctrine adapted further. In their cold, endless hive minds, a question formed. What if humanity cannot be silenced? Then perhaps they must be absorbed. They began building something vast, greater than a fleet, larger than a weapon, a structure meant to swallow entire stars, not with fire, but with oblivion, a construct designed to overwrite the galaxy's very memory of resistance. And while they built, the galaxy rallied. Humanity had given them the song. Now it was time to teach them something else, something older, darker, etched into scar tissue and battlefields. Humanity knew that hope was only one side of survival. The other side was rage. The anthem began to change. It was no longer just joy under fire. It was fury under injustice. It was grief given teeth. It was the roar of every people who had lost something to the Veil and would never forgive. The galaxy that had once laughed at us now trembled with us, and for the first time in their long reign, the Veil dominion trembled back. The galaxy called it peace, but peace is just the quiet between two notes. long after the Vale's armadas had crumbled, long after their null choir was silenced by the anthem's final crescendo, the stars still shimmered with the memory of that sound. It had been more than music. It had been a rewriting of reality itself, a reminder that existence could hum in harmony rather than drown in control. And yet, deep in the void beyond the concordance's border, silence moved again. Not the old Vale fleets, those were gone. What stirred now were fragments, remnants of machines, echoes of code, pieces of their thought network drifting like cosmic dust. In the black vacuum between galaxies, something was trying to reassemble. On Earth, the world had grown quiet in a different way. The anthem had become legend, its words preserved in museums and hearts alike. The human colonies still sang, but softer now, reverently. The great wars had ended, and the galaxy, bruised and reborn, finally turned toward rebuilding. Elena's name, Mara Rhys, the woman who had sung at Ravelon Gate, had become more myth than memory. Statues of her stood on 20 worlds, one hand lifted to the stars, the other clutching the microphone that had once carried humanity's defiance. Children spoke her verses the way older generations recited prayers. But myths have a way of waking when they're needed most. Commander Lyra, of the Jelthari hive, remembered the silence first. Her species didn't hear with ears. They resonated through carapace vibrations. And lately, in the quiet hours of deep space patrol, she had felt a void so profound that even her own pulse seemed to falter. The anthem still played across galactic frequencies, carried as a cultural relic. But out there, beyond the rim, its signal began to fade. And then came the whisper. Not sound, but memory. A pulse from a dead frequency, encoded in the harmonics of the void. It spoke not in words but in emotion, loss, hunger, longing. The Vale remnants had found something new to feed on. They weren't rebuilding fleets this time, they were rebuilding feeling. On a colony orbiting Titan's shadow, a young technician named Mara Rhys woke to find her comms board alight. The surname wasn't coincidence. She was Elena's granddaughter, though she never spoke of it much. Too much pressure, too much history. But that night, when the signals poured in from across 100 systems, reports of vanishing songs, of choirs gone mute mid-breath, she knew it was happening again. She played back the data. The waveform was impossible. Perfectly flat, total null space. It wasn't noise, it was the absence of everything. And within that nothingness, a shape pulsed once, faintly. A harmonic curve that matched her grandmother's voice print. Mara stared, her throat tight. "That's not possible," she whispered. Then the lights went out. The investigation spanned sectors. The Concordance Council, now rebuilt, half-human in leadership, called it the Echo Collapse. Ships reported sudden emotional paralysis. Worlds fell into apathy. Even AI systems began idling, unable to execute commands without purpose. Something in the fabric of thought itself was draining. It wasn't war this time. It was entropy with intent. Humanity's anthem had lit the galaxy. Now something was trying to blow out the flame. Mara, desperate, scoured archives from the Anthem Wars. In an ancient transmission log, corrupted and redacted, she found an entry from Elena herself. A warning never broadcast. The anthem isn't a weapon, it's a bridge. If it ever stops being sung, not by voice but by heart, the silence will find its way back in. Mara leaned back, trembling. The silence wasn't just the veil, it was the universe's default state. Humanity hadn't destroyed it, they had only drowned it out with connection. And now that connection was fading. The solution came, ironically, from a machine. Unit 37C, a diplomatic AI built to maintain interspecies relations, was the first to propose a countermeasure. Not through logic, but through art. It had analyzed the original anthem's emotional resonance and proposed a new iteration. It called it the Reprise, a networked symphony, not performed but felt, transmitted through empathy-linked neural systems across all sentient species, a living circuit of emotion. But there was a cost. Someone had to start the frequency, someone whose mind could bear the full impact of the collective. The same way Elena had once stood alone before an entire fleet, one person would have to open themselves to the raw empathy of every being in the galaxy, and the signal would burn them out completely. Mara didn't hesitate. They built the beacon on the ruins of Ravelon Gate. When it activated, millions watched from 1,000 worlds. The anthem began again, not as a melody, but as a pulse of light threading through the dark. Every mind it touched felt the same thing, grief and love and defiance all at once. The Veil remnants screamed in psychic static as the empathy wave hit them. They had learned from their defeat once before, but they hadn't learned why they lost. You cannot unmake what has been felt. As Mara's consciousness expanded beyond her body, she felt every thought, Jelthari drones humming in resonance, Yer oceans weeping in phosphorescent color, even the broken remnants of the veil flickering with the memory of fear. Her grandmother's voice was there, faint but steady. Sing with them, Mara. Don't fight. Feel. And so she did. The beacon flared. Across the stars, silence shattered once more. The veil didn't die this time. They transformed, their emptiness filled with sound, their cold reason threaded with warmth. What had been enemies became echoes of something new, a species reborn through empathy, not conquest. When the light faded, the galaxy was quiet again, but not with fear, with peace, real peace. Mara Rhys was gone, her body reduced to dust, orbiting the beacon's heart. But her voice remained, carried eternally across the stars as the Reprise's seed tone. Whenever the galaxy begins to drift into indifference, whenever worlds start to forget what it means to feel, the anthem returns, softly, insistently, like a heartbeat beneath the silence. And on one forgotten planet, orbiting a yellow star, a child stood on a balcony, hearing that faint pulse for the first time. He looked up at the sky, puzzled. "Grandma," he said, "why does space sound like music?" She smiled, old and knowing. "Because, my dear, it remembers us."